Well, hello everyone. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this presentation. It's great to have you all here this afternoon. My name is Frederic Palmliden. I work for the Tradestation Labs department, and I will be the presenter for you this afternoon. Now, if you just joined this presentation, you may not have noticed yet that you can send questions or comments in the general chat window. I'm going to be monitoring the questions as they come in, but I may save your questions until the end of the presentation, just to not disturb the flow. Also, notice that there's a Documents folder on the bottom right corner of your screen. The folder contains a white paper version of this presentation that you may want to grab. The PDF will also be available as an attachment to the archive version of this presentation in a couple of business days in the Tradestation website. And actually, let me go ahead here and push the paper into the general chat window. There it is. Now, before we get started, please keep in mind that the different trading ideas, the symbols, and other topics discussed in this presentation are for demonstration purposes only and are not recommendations or endorsements of these symbols or ideas. Also, please read the different disclosure information in the PDF handout available in the Documents folder in the bottom right corner of the viewer or on the Tradestation website. And I'm going to push that important disclosures document into the general chat window. Now, this presentation is the second installment of a series of presentations and white papers on Portfolio Maestro. So for more information about Portfolio Maestro's basic functionality, please see the first installment of a series, which is entitled Portfolio Backtesting with Portfolio Maestro, an introduction to portfolio backtesting. And here's a link that you can use to access the report. There it is. Now, in today's installment of the series, ranking and money management techniques will be analyzed and practical examples will be explored. So, for example, we'll look closely at the impact of a specific ranking method on an existing portfolio. In future presentations, we'll look at Portfolio Maestro's other advanced features, such as portfolio constraints and optimization. Now, before I talk about ranking and portfolio management techniques, let me give you a quick recap about the general design, if you will, of Portfolio Maestro. You need to think about a pyramid here for a second, where the top of the structure is the portfolio, and the base is formed by the selected tradable symbols. Now, if you focus on the middle portion of the pyramid, a strategy group in Portfolio Maestro contains at least one strategy and one symbol. But strategy groups can also be very complex, with multiple strategies and many different symbols. The focus of this presentation is on ranking and money management within Portfolio Maestro. So where do these advanced features fit within the overall structure of a program? Well, they reside at the strategy group level. And the location will actually become very important when we talk about where to go to access the functionality. I will focus on ranking for the first part of this presentation, and we'll look into money management afterwards. Now, ranking is a technique used to filter the symbols already specified in the symbol list tab. So, as you recall from the first presentation that we did on Portfolio Maestro, the symbol list tab is where you specify which symbols you want to use within the strategy group. So ranking is an additional layer, if you will, in the symbol selection process. So in the filtering process, the symbols are sorted in a specified order, and only the top symbols will be used in a strategy. Another way to think about a ranking is to think about ranking as a strategy within a strategy. Or we could say that ranking helps you narrow down which symbols to trade, whereas money management helps you determine how many shares or contracts to buy or to sell short. Now, let's dive into the ranking functionality. So I'm going to switch here to the desktop sharing, and I'm going to be projecting Portfolio Maestro. Now, first of all, to access the ranking functionality, you need to click on the Manage Strategy Group icon, which is on the shortcut bar on the left side, right here. Then click on the Ranking tab and select the needed ranking type from the ranking drop-down list, which you can see right here. Now, there are 12 different ranking techniques available in Portfolio Maestro. So let me go ahead and show you one of the tables that's included in the white paper, which highlights the different ranking techniques. It's going to be table 1 in the white paper. So as you can see here, a ranking technique can be based on a number of things. It can be based on momentum, on RSI values, it could be based on volatility, for example. Also, for each ranking technique, there are a number of parameters, and the user can use a specified top number of symbols or a top percentile number of symbols. So let me switch back to Portfolio Maestro and let's look at an example together. For our example, I'm going to use the percent change ranking technique. Now, in order to highlight the functionality of this ranking technique, the supplied custom strategy long entry is selected in the Strategies tab, which you can see right here. So by default, this strategy component simply buys the symbols in the strategy group if the closing price is greater than 0. So basically, the strategy will just buy all symbols specified in the symbol list, and my ranking technique will then become the driver, if you will, in the strategy group. In our example, the percent change ranking technique simply takes into account how the different symbols in my strategy group symbol list have performed given a specified look-back period. Now, my symbol list, if we go back to that list here, includes the components of a Dow 10 index. So I did this just to keep things simple so we can keep track of our positions. Now, I'm going to leave the default values for the different parameters unchanged. But notice, for example, that you can specify here a minimum price required for a trade to be taken. And you can also specify the look-back period for prices. So by default, that value is set to 30. What I did change here is the frequency to rank symbols. I changed the default daily settings to monthly. So the percent change ranking technique calculation will take place on a monthly basis using daily prices, looking back in this case 30 bars. And since I'm using a daily calculation interval, it's basically saying that it's going to be using 30 business days. I also specify to use the top ranked symbol. You can see that on the top portion of the screen. And I typed 1 in the ranking field in order to demonstrate the technology better. So basically, the ranking technique will only pick the number 1 rated symbol each month. Now, the newly created strategy group needs to be added to a new portfolio using the Manage Portfolio icon in the shortcut bar. And the portfolio is now ready to backtest. Now, in our example, the backtest type is set to standard, and the portfolio is only tested for 1 year. I already backtested this portfolio, so let me show you different sections now of interest from the strategy performance report in order to better understand the ranking functionality. So I'm going to go to reports here, and I'm going to click on performance report and select the correct report here, which is at the bottom. First, let me show you the trade list tab here, and let's see if we can figure out why the symbols were bought in the order shown. So, for example, why was GE bought on October 2nd here of 2012? Well, if we switch to Tradestation and look at a chart with all the different symbols from my symbol list, then the reason will become very clear. So let me switch here to Tradestation. Here you have 10 symbols that were included in my strategy group. So, I'm using a percentage change chart. So if you're not familiar with that functionality in Tradestation, all you need to do is in your chart simply right-click and enable the percent change chart. So here I'm looking at October of 2012. I prepared this chart beforehand, of course, but you can see why GE now was bought on October 2nd of 2012, since it was the best performing symbol at the time. And you can see it here at the very top. You have this red line showing that it's GE, the performance of GE versus the other 9 symbols in my symbol list. So remember that the ranking condition was to find the best performing symbol for the last 30 days. Now let me switch back to Portfolio Maestro. Notice that no symbols were bought in certain months, and that is an important concept here to understand. The ranking technique will select the top 1 symbol from my symbol list. However, if a symbol that makes the cut is already held, then no symbol will be bought for that particular month. So the main point here is that a ranking technique will not skip currently held symbols, which explains why there is no activity in our example during certain months. For example, there was no activity in August of 2012. See, we had activity in June, July, nothing in August, and then we had a position that was bought in September. Now, to finish this introduction on ranking, let me point out some neat graphs that you have access to in the performance report that can highlight the impact of a ranking technique. For example, let me show you the total P&L by symbol, which is under the equity section. So I'm going to click on the graph tab. I'm going to go to equity and select the total P&L by symbol. And I'm going to select all my different symbols in my list. So here you can see that the different contribution of individual symbols. So just remember to check some of these graphs out they can provide really a wealth of information, since they are not limited to only one symbol, like the standard strategy performance report that you have in Tradestation. So now let's switch gears and talk about money management in Portfolio Maestro. In the context of Portfolio Maestro, you want to think about money management as position sizing. By default, without any other stipulations, 100 shares of every stock that meet your conditions are bought within your strategy group. So whether a stock is priced at $10 or $100, 100 shares are bought, which means that the price at which you buy the individual security will have a large impact on the risk taken and on your P&L. So fortunately, with the money management functionality, you can normalize the exposure for the different symbols traded. The position size can be based on various factors, including equity, volatility factors, and I have a complete list of the available money management strategies in the white paper. So let me go to that table. That's going to be table 2 in the paper. Let me scroll down to it right here. Let's see, it's going to be on page 6 in the white paper. So multiple parameters are going to be available for each section. So notice that you have many different options here. You can choose to base your position sizing on different fixed fractional methodologies, for example, or you can simply choose a fixed amount of money per trade using the fixed amount. And that's the option that you can see here close to the top in the table. Now, in order to better understand the money management functionality, let's look at an example together. First, to access the functionality, we need to click on the Manage Strategy Groups icon again. So let me go back here and click on Manage Strategy Group. Remember the pyramid structure from the beginning of the presentation, showing that money management strategies reside at the strategy group level within Portfolio Maestro. Now, within the Strategies tab, right here, click on the Strategy Settings button. It's going to be on the middle portion of your screen. Then, from the Strategy Settings dialog, you need to click on the Money Management tab to access the functionality. So, for our example, I selected the fixed fractional by price money management strategy. Remember that the selected money management strategy is going to be applied to all symbols within the strategy group for a particular strategy component. So if you have multiple strategy components, like I do in my example, or if you have multiple strategy groups, you want the same money management strategy applied across the board, then you will need to specify to use the needed money management strategy for each strategy component. You're going to have to specify it for each one. Now, the purpose of a fixed fractional method is to incorporate a risk component in the trade size calculation. So there are a number of fixed fractional money management techniques to choose from. Let me bring down that list again here. But really, the underlying principle is the same, which is to specify a certain equity exposure for a selected metric, like the price of the underlying symbol, for example, which is what it's doing when you do the fixed fractional by price. The main advantage is to roughly have the same type of risk exposure across positions in your strategy group. Now, at the same time, a possible drawback then is to forego potential profits by trimming equity exposure versus having a larger equity exposure using a fixed number of shares when a position is moving in the right direction, of course. So then keep in mind that this drawback then can become an advantage by possibly limiting losses if a position goes against expectations. Now, the default setting of 5% in my example is adjusted to 2%, meaning that 2% of equity will be risked per position. Now, let's take a look at the strategy components for our example. I'm going to click OK here and go to the Strategies tab. Here I'm using a different strategy group from our previous example. I have chosen the moving average two-line cross, LE and SE, for long entries and short entries. So I did this in order to be able to trade both sides of the market, long and short. The different strategy settings for the strategy components are kept at their default settings, and the NASDAQ 100 index component are selected as the new symbol list. Now, I already performed the backtest beforehand, so by looking at the results now from an identical portfolio but without the money management strategy, the performance report will only reflect the impact of money management. So we can go back and forth between the two portfolios, one with money management and one without, and we can see the impact. So let's take a look at the performance report. So, and we'll look at the performance report of the portfolio with money management at first. So here is the equity graph, for example. And let's actually go ahead and take a look at the Trades List tab. This tab is going to show different amounts now for the different symbols. Now take a look at the quantity column here. Remember, by default, you would have 100 shares for each trade that you take. So now we have different amounts across the board. So how is the quantity calculated in this case? Well, for each symbol, the utilized fixed fractional by price technique will dictate the number of shares as follows. It will be 2% of the portfolio's equity divided by the stock price. So at first, the portfolio equity will just be my initial capital, which by default is $100,000. But then it becomes the portfolio equity as of the time the strategy group is evaluated. So let's look at the first trade that was taken. So it's going to be using 2% of my initial capital, so which means 2% of 100,000, meaning $2,000, and it's just going to take that amount divided by the stock price. So you'll take, in this case, the price of BIIB, and the resulting quantity is then 40 shares. So it's important to remember here that money management strategies can have a significant impact on performance. And we can see that by looking at the cumulative return and drawdown graph, for example, which shows peak return and the worst drawdown in the covered period. So let me go ahead here and switch to that graph. It's going to be right here. So now, by going back and forth between this portfolio and an identical portfolio, except for the inclusion of money management, we can see the differences. So here is with money management, and here is without. So what do you notice? Well, one thing that should jump out is money management. Your drawdown is roughly 70%. With money management, it is cut by over half, roughly 28%. However, the overall performance was also cut significantly. If we look at the overall performance here, we have a return of 12%, but notice that it was much larger without money management. So money management can be a double-edged sword, if you will. And it's important to remember that money management may not always have a positive impact on your overall performance. Now, another interesting graphic is the symbol cumulative P&L by date graphic. Let me show you that one. It's going to be under equity. And go down here and select symbol cumulative P&L by date. And I'm going to go ahead here and select all symbols. It'll take a few moments to refresh. All right, and so here we're looking at the symbol cumulative P&L by date graphic without money management. So you're basically looking at the contribution of each symbol to your overall performance. So what do you notice in this graph? And as a reminder, this is without money management. Well, notice that you have a large majority of positions that are grouped together near this zero line. And then you have outliers. You have a few symbols that are contributing enormously to your overall performance. Now, if we switch to the same graphic with money management, take a second here to refresh. There we go. Here you can see that the positions are much more normalized. So without money management, we can see that a few symbols dictate the performance of the overall portfolio, since their weightings in currency terms is so much larger than the rest of the portfolio positions. On the other hand, if we include money management, position sizes are normalized and the impact of each position is roughly balanced. All right, well, this brings us to our question and answer time. So while you type in questions, keep in mind that if you missed something or if you didn't quite understand something that I covered, you will have access to the video archive for this presentation in a couple of business days, and you'll also have access to a white paper which covers all the content that I talked about today. In fact, let me go ahead here and push that paper in the general chat window one more time. All right, I think there are several questions that came in, so I'm going to scroll up and see and start from the beginning here. All right, it looks like Michael answered several of those questions already. Thank you, Michael. So yes, Portfolio Maestro is available for FX. So it's available for equities, futures, and Forex. There is actually a walk forward aspect in Portfolio Maestro. If we go back to the Manage Portfolio tab, and if I select one of my portfolios here, and we go to the backtest portfolio, what you can do instead of doing a standard backtest, which would be an exhaustive approach to your backtest, you can select optimization or walk forward. And that walk forward optimization will be different than the other walk forward optimization that you may be used to in the Tradestation platform. All right, let me take a look at other questions here. Yes, this presentation will be archived and it will be available on YouTube later on. Here's a question about how to access Portfolio Maestro. That's something I covered actually in the first presentation, but I'll be glad to review it here. If you do not have Portfolio Maestro access right now, what you need to do is go to the Tradestation website and go to the Client Center. That's going to be on the top right corner of the Tradestation website page. You'll need to log in, and you'll be able to select Portfolio Maestro there, and you can then actually download it on your machine. So for now, Portfolio Maestro is not fully integrated to the Tradestation platform. Therefore, you'll not have a Maestro icon in the Tradestation platform. Instead, you'll have an icon on your desktop, and that's what you'll need to use to access the product. Question here from Z about dynamic position sizing. And so yes, that's exactly what we did earlier with a fixed fractional. It's taking the portfolio equity real time as of the time when positions are bought and sold. So it's very much dynamic versus your static default setting. Can the optimization target function be controlled in Portfolio Maestro? It's an optimization target function. I'm not sure, Avi, what you mean there. I think you might be talking about the increment maybe for your inputs. And so let me go back to that window quickly here. So if let's say we were to perform an optimization on this particular portfolio, if you go to the strategy input here, you specify the range, the minimum, max, and then the step, meaning the increment between the minimum setting and the maximum setting. I think that's what you are referring to. And keep in mind that we'll have a whole presentation dedicated to optimization in Portfolio Maestro. So I'm not going to go into it too much right now. I'll save that for a future presentation. All right, well, I think I'm going to stop the question and answer time. And I want to point out the next presentation, which will take place around mid-August. The next installment will focus on portfolio constraints and portfolio stop functionality. Also, on this slide, you can see contact information to open an account. And I also encourage you to complete an online survey about today's presentation. It's your chance to submit feedback and provide any suggestions you may have. So thank you very much for attending. The room will stay open for another couple of minutes or so. I'm going to keep an eye on the general chat window and type in answers if you have any more. So have a nice evening, everyone. Thank you for attending, and see you soon at another Tradestation event.